The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waking humanity, one soul at a time. This is the World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome along to this evening's edition of The World You Don't Know with myself, Mick O'Connell. I've got a very interesting show for you tonight. I'm sure most of you have seen the movie The Matrix. It's a great concept for a movie that we all live in a computer simulation. Now, here's the thing. The latest thinking now in science, in quantum physics especially, is that we are living in a simulation. And I know this sounds completely out there, but bear with me. The reason they're coming up with this hypothesis is when scientists do the mathematics to describe the nature of the universe, the mathematics that they use make more sense if they apply it to a simulation as opposed to a material reality like the one we think we live in. Now, I'm not saying we do live in the Matrix. Now, I remember watching the movie The Matrix. I went to see it in 1999, and I remember thinking to myself and then saying to my friend Darren, who was with me at the time, what if? And he looked at me and says, what do you mean, what if? I says, what if we were all living in the Matrix? He says, what are you talking about? I says, could you imagine if we were all living in a computer simulation? How would we even know? And that's going to be the nature of tonight's talk. Now, the gentleman I have coming on the show is a NASA scientist, believe it or believe it not, and his name is Richard Terrile, and he is one of the proponents of this theory. Now, think about this. 40 years ago, we had Pong, the game. 2 rectangles and a dot. And that's where we were. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously. And it's getting better every year. And soon we'll have virtual reality, we'll have augmented reality. And this is a quote from Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla Motors. Now, if you assume any rate of improvement at all, he says, then the games will become indistinguishable from reality. It's a view shared by my next guest, Rich Terrile. If one progresses at the current rate of technology, a few decades into the future, very quickly we will be a society where there are artificial entities living in simulations that are much more abundant than human beings. In other words, there will be literally trillions of simulated human beings living in countless simulations in the future. If there are many more simulated minds than organic ones, then the chances of us being among the real minds starts to look more and more unlikely. As Terrile puts it, if in the future there are more digital people living in simulated environments than there are today, then what is to say that we are not part of that already, i.e. living in a simulation? Reasons to believe that the universe is a simulation include the fact that it behaves mathematically and is broken up into pieces, subatomic particles, like a pixelated video game. The universe is pixelated, folks. Even things that we think of as continuous, like time, energy, space, volume, all have a finite limit to their size. And if that's the case, then our universe is both computable and finite. These properties allow the universe to be simulated. So that's going to be the nature of the show. So I'm going to go straight to my guest, Rich Terrile, who was over in California, as far as I know. So good evening, Rich. Are you there?
Hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant. You're very welcome along to the World You Don't Know show. Now, I don't know if you heard my introduction. I was speaking about basically what you talk about, the simulated reality. That 40 years ago we had the game Pong, and now we have games like Call of Duty, which are extremely photorealistic, and you can only imagine what they'll be like in 1,000 years' time. And basing your hypothesis on that, the chances that we're living in a computer simulation, according to Elon Musk, are 1 in billions. I mean, that this is base reality.
Our chances of living in a simulation, I think, according to Elon Musk, is very, very high.
Yeah. And what's your own theory on that?
Well, it boils down to this. Right now, we can create simulations, and we can populate them with computer-driven characters. In some cases, when we play, it's hard to determine whether we're playing against a real person or a computer simulation of a person. Just by behaviors. But eventually, if one believes that there's nothing special about what forms consciousness, if it follows science, it follows the biological complexity of what our brains are, and it arises from that, then there's every reason to believe that we'll be able to create consciousness in machines. And if that's the case, then one can imagine very soon, and it's not 1,000 years from now, we're really talking about probably 30 to 50 years from now, we could have conscious beings in machine simulations, and at that time, one would expect, because of the progression of computer speeds and resources that we have available, that there could be many, many more conscious people living in simulations than there are real people.
Now, I've seen a video there recently with Elon Musk. He was at some conference, and a gentleman in the audience asked him this very question about us living in a simulation. And basically he was saying that based on the mathematics that describe the universe, he was quoting another guy, Professor James Gates, and Professor Gates was saying that when he was using the equations to describe the nature of the universe, he discovered this code in it. And it drew me back to a documentary I seen many years ago, and I think it was called God and DNA. I think that was the name of the actual YouTube video. But it was this engineer who was on, and he was describing codes, and what he said was that no code has ever come into existence without human thought entering into it, that codes don't happen randomly, that someone has to sit in front of a computer and write the program. And if that's the case, he was applying it to DNA at the time, saying that scientists had discovered that DNA was written like a mathematical code, and if that's the case, someone had to have designed it. Is that God?
That's not necessarily the case. My group does simulated evolution, where we can actually discover complex things by trial and error, the same way in which we came to be, by random variation and then selection. And you can actually write fairly complex pieces of code by that same methodology. So it's not necessarily a slam dunk on that particular, the fact that there's a DNA code and it's written like a computer program, that we believe that has arisen by evolution.
I mean, the creationists will love this, saying that, the universe was only created 6,000 years ago. And, if you apply it to that, and like if someone did only create this program or this simulation, say 6,000 years ago, I'm not saying it makes sense, but, if I was a creationist, I would latch onto that.
Well, perhaps. The fact is that if we are in a simulation, we don't know how old that simulation is. A simulation could have, back history that could run all the way back to the beginning of the universe, or it could have started, 5 minutes ago.
Now, if we were in a simulation, how would we know?
Well, that's really the question, whether we would know at all, whether there'd be anything to know. And the only way we would know is if there were some shortcoming in the simulation, either a flaw or some limited resources that the simulator had in order to create the simulation. In other words, an edge or pixelation or something that would demonstrate that there's some limitation in our world. And so you can ask that question, are we seeing anything like that? Are we seeing the edge of our world in any of these dimensions? And one could say that, well, there's evidence that certainly our world is pixelated like a video game. There's certainly evidence that, like a video game, our world isn't totally rendered all the time everywhere. It's only rendered where we're looking. It's only rendered where we have an observation.
That's the double slit experiment. That's what you're describing there.
Exactly. It's a quantum mechanical, which means the study of the very small phenomenon, that things only have a defined finite state when they're being observed, and when they're not being observed, they tend to be probabilistic. They tend to wash over larger areas, like a photon going through a double slit. When we look at each of the slits, we know that a photon is either going through one slit or the other. But when we don't look, the photons go through, presumably one by one, but somehow they know that there are two slits there because they form a diffraction pattern.
And go through both slits at the same time.
Yes, and that's a peculiar property, and that's one that's very, very difficult to explain. And we do explain it by trying to take the observer out of the loop, by creating theories about the way particles behave. And you may have heard of the many worlds theory, where the world splits up into different universes every time there's a quantum mechanical choice. Or Pauli had a theory where each particle in the universe has a wave that propagates into the past and into the future, which tells the particle exactly what's going to happen and what has happened, and that's why they behave that way. All of these are really very, very peculiar twists that need to be added to these to the theory of quantum mechanics in order to make it detached from having to interact with a consciousness. The question is, well, maybe that assumption is incorrect, and maybe quantum mechanics actually does interact with a conscious entity, and like a video game, the world or the reality that we sense is steered because that's where we're looking.
And do you think the law of attraction, I'm sure you've heard of that, it's been doing the rounds on the internet for years. I know gurus have been talking about the law of attraction for thousands of years, but most people in the world are only learning of the law of attraction and its implications, if it's true, since the advent of the internet. That's where I learned about the law of attraction. Up until that point, I just thought whatever life throws at you, life throws at you. And now I come to the conclusion that maybe you're attracting stuff into your life by virtue of what you're thinking, i.e. your consciousness. So if if the law of attraction is real, is that how you hack into the matrix, by virtue of the thoughts you hold in your head?
Well, I don't know. I haven't figured out a way to control if we are in a situation, in a simulation. But there's a lot written on this, and it's a very old idea. I mean, the Greeks even talked about dreams within dreams as an explanation for reality. So I don't think anybody really has the answer as to whether we can control the reality that we have.
I mean, that was something I've often thought as well myself. I'm sure most people in the world think it. When you're dreaming, you get these little fleeting moments. Well, is your dream the real world, or is the one we're in now, is this the real world? Right.
It's going to get even stranger when we start to engage in virtual reality and in these simulated worlds. As our instrumentation gets better and better, then we will be immersing ourselves into these simulations at a more and more real state, not only photoreal but sensory real. Once that occurs, I mean, think about this: if you can, for a while, put on the virtual reality goggles and helmet and go into a world which is identical or indistinguishable from the real world, then how do you ever know that you've taken the goggles off and have not just gone into some other form of virtual world?
So in some sense,
at that stage, our real reality almost loses its significance.
And if you were, I suppose, if you woke up in that reality, how would you know whether you did have the goggles or not? I was at a shopping centre there the other day in Dublin, and they're actually selling those goggles, and they're selling them very cheap. They're just a cheap version of them that you actually put your phone into, and you can download these apps from the App Store. And there was one which was a roller coaster. That was the one they were using the demo. So I put it on, and they're quite cheap. They're less than, in your country, would be less than $50 for a pair of these, and here they're 30-something euros. And I did put it on in the roller coaster, and I had the sensation. Now, I was telling myself that I'm standing on the spot in the middle of a shopping mall, but I did have the sensation of dipping down on a roller coaster that you would normally get in a real situation. And it did have that effect on my brain.
Yeah, it's very compelling, and even with the rather crude technology that we have today. But, given another, 5 or 10 years of progression of that kind of technology, then that world is going to get very, very real.
All right, listen, I need to take a quick break, so do you mind hanging on for a couple of minutes?
Sure.
That'd be brilliant. Folks, we'll be back in 2 minutes with Richard.
You're listening to Liffey Sound on 96.4 FM.
Now, folks, you're very welcome back. Richard, you're still with me? Hello?
Hello.
Brilliant, yes. You're still there. My next question, I suppose, is if the simulated reality, this computer-generated universe is real, just for argument's sake, if it is real, is that proof that God exists?
That's a great question, and I think it really bears thinking about a little bit. And one can ask, well, can God exist in our universe? Without miracles, can can God exist in a world where the speed of light is the speed of light and time travel is not possible, and we abide by the laws of physics? And in the case of a simulation, that really is the case. You think about the power that a simulator has: create a universe, have omniscient knowledge over what goes on in it, have power over the laws of that govern that universe, the laws of physics, the basic tenets of reality. That basically is someone with godlike powers. So if we really are in a universe, in a simulation of our universe, then clearly the programmer or the person or entity involved in creating that simulation is really identical to what our religions call God.
Now, I watched that 20-minute YouTube presentation that you gave, and the guy who introduced you, I don't know the guy's name, I can't remember his name, but you had a little discussion at the end of it, and he made me laugh out loud when I watched what he said and what he thought it was. Now, he did mention first a snotty-nosed Korean in his bedroom, but which probably does make a bit of sense. But he said that if God, if he did indeed exist, and he was this omnipotent being who knew everything and knew the outcome of everything before it even happened, would be eternally bored. So he created this universe with all its flaws and all its suffering to entertain himself.
I think that's a valid idea. And just think about yourself, okay? Think about yourself living the next 30 to 50 years. Eventually, you'll be able to create simulations and live in them. Live in a house by the beach, have infinite property. You create your own universe populated with whatever people or entities or houses or whatever you want in it, and you would have the power to fly, the power to do anything you want in that universe. The question is, given that kind of power and that kind of ability, also you might be able to, if we can exist as or communicate the way machines do, we could maybe tap into other people's consciousness and have kind of a one consciousness in the future. If one existed in a world like that, then one might think that it might be cool to just kind of step back and put yourself into a rather limited world, alone in a body, surrounded by other people, trying to struggle through existence and put up challenges for yourself. That kind of makes logical sense of what might happen in our universe, and it's been a struggle even in religion. Why would God cause suffering if God could change that? And it's been a mystery in religion, and it might also be kind of a mystery or a way to challenge oneself in the simulation idea.
And there's an English comedian, I don't know if you're aware of him, I think he's quite well known in the United States, Stephen Fry's name is. He was interviewed by one of Ireland's oldest broadcasters, Gay Byrne, who's a famous broadcaster over here, and it's a conversation about God and life and religion and stuff like that, but he asked him a question at the end, like, do you think there's a God? And his reply was, well, look, if there is a God, he says, I've got nothing but contempt for him, he says, because what kind of a God would allow a worm to exist that its only function in life is to burrow through the eyes of African children? And when he said that, I said, what kind of a God would actually do something like that? Even if it is just for entertainment, it's a bit of a sick, twisted way to entertain yourself, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. Again, it's one of those mysteries that we've been contending with ever since ever since people started thinking about it.
I read 3 books by a guy called Neil Donald Walsh called A Conversation with God, and I read them within the space of 2 months, and they were absolutely compelling books. But one thing I got from the books was that if there is a God, he doesn't give a toss. He really doesn't care what goes on in anybody's life, because to him there's no good, there's no bad, there's no evil, there's no nothing. It's just everything is what it is, and you've just to get on with it, It sounds like the God that your friend described at the end of your speech, he's just doing it for self-entertainment. If it's a he, assuming that's what it is. Maybe,
but what I'm saying is put yourself in that position, give yourself that kind of power, and
he sort of reminds me of that character that was in Star Trek, Q, I don't know if you remember that character.
Yes.
And he was like an omnipotent god. And the only way you could get entertainment was by making the crew of the Enterprise suffer.
Right. He was a god with our kind of human frailties. He was very self-centered. And, maybe that's the case. Maybe we live in a world which is dictated by some, video, kid playing a video game 30 years from now, and we're in that simulation.
It's a crazy thought. Here's my next question. I've actually got a few questions written down here because I didn't want to get cut short. This is about the movie The Matrix. Now, I'm sure you've seen The Matrix. We've all seen it, and this is basically what we're talking about here. In The Matrix, the real world, according to Morpheus, was post-apocalyptic, and it was in ruins. Now, what if that was just a simulation also? No one ever asked that question at the time. Because everybody who watched that movie assumed that the ruined world that Morpheus lived in their ships was the real world. And I couldn't help thinking at the time, what if that's another simulation? How would they even know?
There's another movie called The 13th Floor, which talks about that, which talks about simulations on top of simulations. As the people in that movie go to create a simulation, they find themselves also living in someone else's simulation. So the real question is what is eventually the real world? How far down do you have to go through simulations in order to reach the real world? And of course, we'd never know that.
But when you look at the world,
really doesn't matter.
When you look at the world that we live in, though, I mean, the horrors that go on in the world, and don't get me wrong, I always end my show with a quote that the world is full of wonderful people, and if you can't find one, be one, because there's billions of wonderful people out there. There's no doubt about that. If this is just a simulation, those who are in control, do you think that they might know that it's a simulation, and that's how they're in such control?
Well, that's always a kind of a paranoid argument that there is some Illuminati or some elite running the world, and they can.
But that's how it looks, though, to most people.
It does. I don't know. That kind of conspiracy theory idea has been around again forever. That there is some entity that coexists in our world that is actually running it, and that that could be the case.
Well, if you go the way David Icke, now he maintains that it's these lizards or whatever, the shapeshifters, and the Queen is a shapeshifter. And that's the one thing that sort of bugs me about David Icke, because 99% of the information he talks about, in relation to banking and stuff like that is usually, factful, and you can check it, and he's telling the truth about most of that stuff. But then he goes on to that, and it sort of destroys a lot of his other arguments,
Right.
To think that we're run by these entities. My next question, and this is going to lead into the Mandela effect. Now, I'm sure you're aware of the Mandela effect. It's this latest phenomenon on the internet where people think reality is changing and stuff like that. Philip K. Dick, do you remember the author Philip K. Dick?
Yes.
In 1977, he said in a thing, and you can find this on YouTube, that he had definitive proof that we were living in a computer-generated reality, and that the only way we would know is if a variable was changed. And that sort of brings it into the Mandela effect, because if you look at the Mandela effect, certain historical variables have been changed, according to proponents of the Mandela effect. I think it all could tie together if it is indeed a simulation.
Well, I'm not quite familiar with what you mean by the Mandela effect.
But I'll give you a quick synopsis of what it is. Basically, some people have blogging online over the last couple of years that they remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, whereas most of us remember Nelson Mandela getting released from prison, becoming the South African president, and dying a couple of years ago. But there's other things that have changed, like lines in movies and stuff like that. Like Forrest Gump, did he say life is like a box of chocolates, or life was like a box of chocolates? People assume that, or are convinced that it was is, but if you go onto YouTube, he doesn't say is, he says was. So people think, someone is messing around with reality like on a quantum level. This is the conspiracy surrounding the Mandela effect. And I'm thinking, like, with Philip K. Dick saying the only way you would know that we were living in a simulation is if some variable had changed. And I'm thinking, if the Mandela effect is something that's real, they're blaming CERN on the Mandela effect, by the way, but if it is real and variables are changing, that sort of tells me maybe we are living in a simulation.
Well, I don't put much credence into the Mandela effect in that sense, unless we can, somehow show some better proof of that. But these kinds of these kind of border on conspiracy theories, and I kind of deal with science and what we can show and what we can demonstrate and what we can have lots and lots of very, very strong evidence for. So aside from what goes on in the internet and these kinds of ideas, the question that we have is there evidence in the natural world that we can point to that would indicate one way or the other that our world is in part being simulated?
The Fibonacci sequence in nature, it's seen throughout nature that, if you look at a plant under a microscope, it's mathematical in its growth.
Yeah. But I tell you, the entire universe is mathematical, and that's one of the greatest mysteries of the universe, is that it follows mathematics. As a scientist with a long career in science, one has to step back and think a little bit about what science is. And, one can define science as, it's the creation of this understanding of the natural world. And we're not really creating an understanding of the natural world. We're actually finding the mathematical relationships that explain observations of the natural world. And the fact that we can always find mathematical relationships, and these are so strong that we can even take those mathematical relationships and make predictions from them. The Higgs particle that was discovered a couple of years ago was based on the fact that it just fell out of the mathematics of trying to explain other particle interactions. And that's rather astonishing, that the universe follows mathematics. Einstein himself was, one of the quotes from him was that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. We don't understand why the universe follows mathematics, and everything in the universe follows mathematics, but it does. And this is an extraordinary property, and because of that property, the universe can be simulated, and it can be simulated down to any resolution that we're capable of sensing. And because of that, because of the fact that we can simulate the universe and we can simulate it in a computer much, much smaller than the universe. We don't need the universe to simulate the universe. We need something much, much smaller, much more compact. And it's that compactness and that property of the universe which is rather extraordinary. It did not have to be this way, given all the different ways of creating a universe. But ours is very, very special in that sense, and it's very, very special in the property that we can create these simulations.
Can I ask you if this is indeed a simulation? They've been trying to figure out ways of creating life from basically nothing. Scientists, that it's one of the the big goals of science. How does life actually begin? If DNA, as I've discovered, is quantized, it's codable, it's a written code. Do you think you might figure it out as mathematicians, etc., a way of kickstarting life, based on mathematics?
Oh, absolutely. There are many realms of artificial life. We can try to create artificial life in computers, in computer simulations. We can also try to create artificial life forms in laboratories. And a great deal of work is going on into understanding how life began on Earth, what basic ingredients you need, and given enough time and enough of an environment, can these chemicals come together and actually create a self-replicating system that can eventually gain the complexity of biology and eventually intelligence. And it looks like there is a path to do that. We're making lots and lots of progress toward that.
Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, I think it's a great thing. I think it's something we need to understand. I think we are very close to having the ability not only to understand life, but to manipulate it, to engineer it. In genetic engineering, in artificially enhancing or addressing diseases. There's a great deal of understanding in that. It's also very dangerous because, again, you're hacking into something which is programmable. The genetic code is a program, and that program tells biology how to construct a human being or whatever life form that genome is from. And we're now gaining the understanding of what that code means and the ability and engineering agility to make changes in that.
Now, another question I have here for you. There's a lot of articles online about some tech billionaires from Silicon Valley who are looking at ways of breaking out of this simulation, if it is indeed a simulation. And assuming that that is what it is, if they could get us out of it, where would we go? And would there be anywhere to go?
It's an interesting idea. I think one needs to do two things in order to really understand this realm of simulation. We need to understand the physical, natural world and what pieces of that world are pointing one way or the other toward the simulation, and what can we understand about the nature if indeed we are in a simulation. I think we also need to point toward the future and understand what abilities or what information we will gain by creating our own simulations and perhaps our own forms of artificial intelligence.
All right. One thing I've noticed about this country as far as education goes, you know, as I pointed out earlier on, just for argument's sake, say our dear leaders worldwide and the elites, or however you want to call them, that, you know, have ultimate control over the planet. If they did know this and they knew it was a simulation, they knew how it all worked and stuff like that. When we were going to school, you know, all you were taught about in school was how to become an obedient taxpayer. They didn't really teach you anything about life, you know, about the nature of the universe, the real nature of reality, etc., etc. You know, they taught you how to be an office worker, you know, how to walk the grindstone and pay your taxes. You know, I think that's deliberate, assuming they do know that this is a simulation, that they want to keep the good chunk of the game for themselves rather than let it be a level playing field.
That's why we have to be smart stewards of our world, and we have to think outside the box, and we have to think about things that are beyond our normal teachings.
Yeah, it's a mad world. Listen, I need to go to my last set of ads, so do you mind hanging on for a couple of minutes?
Sure.
That'd be brilliant. Folks, be back in 2 minutes with Richard.
Local programs, local presenters, local news. Tune to Liffey Sound 96.4 FM.
Now, folks, you're very welcome back. Richard, you're still with me?
Yes, I am.
Now, Nick Bostrom, he had an interesting take on this simulation theory. I can't remember all three of what he says, but I'll try to remember exactly what he said. He basically said that if we don't get a handle over technology, that we'll go extinct within a certain period of time. That's what will happen to us. And we are living in a simulation, and we've already gone extinct. And he was basically saying that, as you were saying yourself earlier, computers will get so advanced that they could make conscious simulations within simulations within simulations, and based on that argument alone, the chances that we're actually in one are very, very high.
Exactly. That's exactly the argument that we make. The fact that they're going to be so easy to do means that they should be very, very prevalent. And the question is, if we're just a little bit further into the future than we think we are, then we could be a product of one of these simulations.
Now, can I ask you a question? I've always wondered why technology, you know, was pretty basic up to the Second World War, say. And after that, then it's gone crazy altogether. Like exponentially, it's doubling in its capacity every few months now, as opposed to every couple of years. But one thing that has never really progressed from the time it was invented, and I can't think of why, unless there's a conspiracy surrounding it, is the internal combustion engine. You know, if you look at telephones, like a telephone was a huge device years ago, a computer was as big as a house in the 40s and 50s. Now there's more computing power in the fob that you use to lock your door on your car than there was on the moon lander. You know, why has technology jumped so fast, so quickly, and yet basic technology like the internal combustion engine hasn't gone anywhere?
Well, for one thing, the internal combustion engine turned out to be a very, very large endeavor in terms of involving oil production, gasoline. It was a huge, gigantic, multi-billion-dollar industry. Internal combustion engine is a very, very efficient way of containing energy. You can get about 30% of the energy out of a gallon of gasoline. It's a very, very compact way to store energy. And only recently has battery technology come up to the kinds of standards of energy density, of containing energy in a small volume that is both affordable and transportable. So I think because of the fact that other technologies had to catch up with this very, very advanced idea, which is the internal combustion engine. That and also because there was such an industry behind it that it kind of tended to stifle some of the other ideas. No one wanted to go to electric cars when you can have, when oil companies controlled and auto manufacturers controlled, kind of these gigantic industries. So I think we're seeing now this kind of competitive nature of that whole business. There are other technologies now that are now much more competitive, and we're seeing them rise to existence. Battery technology, electric technology, fuel cell technology, things like that.
Elon Musk now, he seems hell-bent now on destroying the oil industry with his electric cars. Now, they're fairly expensive at the moment. I think 90,000 to 100,000 euros in Ireland for the cheapest model. Right. So it's going to be a long time before anybody in this country can afford one of them.
Well, however, because the technologies involved in these industries are the same kind of technologies that you talked about doubling every year or so, then we're seeing computer prices. Basically, you get twice as much performance every year for the same amount of money. And similarly, car prices can also decrease, and we're seeing them decrease. We're seeing battery technology, batteries get cheaper. All of these things are getting cheaper and cheaper to put together. So I expect that these cars, even though they're very, very expensive today, will in the next half a decade or so become much more affordable.
Yeah, I think they'll have to do that here in Ireland. There's a big problem here in this country with car insurance, the cost of it. It's rising exponentially over the last couple of years. And the insurance companies, of course, are blaming claimants and stuff like that, people getting whiplash. But nothing could be further from the truth. But one thing that's happened to the second-hand car market here is there's a massive glut of top-of-the-range cars like Mercedes, Audis, high-capacity engines, 2 litres, 2.5 litres, that people can't pay the tax on because the tax is so high. Now, you can get cheaper tax here if your car is electric or has little or no emissions coming from it, whereas if it's a pre-08 car, you're going to pay through the nose to have it on the road. So I can literally go out tomorrow now and I can buy myself an 06 Mercedes for less than €1,000. A car that would have cost €30,000 10 years ago.
Right. Well, we're seeing that in lots of industries. We're seeing, kind of driving toward creating these markets for these new technologies. Yeah, similarly with self-driving cars, where I think we're going to see that become much, much cheaper, much more affordable, and much better driving situation than having us drive our cars.
Now, something else I want to ask you about as well, the D-Wave computer, I'm sure you're aware of that. I've seen a video on YouTube about this D-Wave, and a guy gave a lecture about it. I can't remember his name, and he was basically saying that this computer was a quantum computer, so instead of operating on ones and zeros, it operated on both 1 and 0 at the same time. So, it was left and right at the same time, up and down at the same time, as opposed to being binary like our computers would be. And he was saying that this computer had the ability to dip in and out of different dimensions and take information from them and bring it back into our own. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, that's a very flowery way of saying that. What quantum computers do is they exist in a state of superposition, which means that they have multiple states existing at the same time. And in a standard computer, you actually you have this progression of ones and zeros, and you create an answer from this manipulation of numbers. In a quantum computer, you basically the computer allows you to create all these virtual states, virtual calculations, and then come up with the final answer out of this exploration of many, many states. I wouldn't really call it alternate dimensions or anything like that, but it is the way in which nature works. Nature seems to work in the same manner. And we're copying that same idea in these quantum computers. It's a very, very effective way. And energetically, instead of having to do all these calculations, you only pay for the answer you get. So even though you're exploring a huge amount of space, you're not having to pay that energy cost.
A lot of people are giving it. There's a lot of blogs online that are linking the D-Wave computer and CERN in relation to the Mandela effect, and they're coming up with all sorts of wild conspiracies and stuff like that, saying that because of this D-Wave computer, it's CERN who are changing the nature of our reality. And a few examples that they've thrown up, like song lyrics and stuff like that, and I don't know if it's my memory or whether this stuff is real, but I'll give you one example, like the Queen song "We Are the Champions." the end of the song, some people are saying some of the lyrics are missing from the end of the song. Instead of it ending, we are the champions of the world, he just says, we are the champions, and the song stops dead. It just fades out, and there is no ending to it. And if you go onto YouTube, you can't find it anywhere, and yes, some people swear blind the end of the song was there. And the reason it sort of held sway with me was, did you ever watch that Carpool Karaoke?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was an episode of that. George Clooney, I think, was in the car, and Julia Roberts, and they were singing that song, and when they got to the end of it, lo and behold, the end was gone, and they all looked at each other mystified as to where the end of the song was gone. And I was saying, I won't pass any comment on it. But a couple of weeks ago, I was taking my son to school, and I had a local radio station on, and the song was on. So I said to myself, I'll leave it on. And lo and behold, the end of the song was gone. And the DJ who was on the air at the time, he just quipped up and says, where's the end of that song gone? He even remembered that there was probably the end of that song there, But if you go onto YouTube or look anywhere online, you cannot find an example where the end of the song is there. It's not there, it's gone.
Huh. I remember the end of that song. We are the champions of the world.
Well, go on YouTube, and I can guarantee you will not find it anywhere. Huh. Now, I did ask, there's a DJ on before me who likes that kind of music. He likes his heavy metal and that. And I asked him about it, and he went off and looked. And he says, I've got a couple of live versions where it is at the end of it, but on the studio album, it's not. It's gone. You're right, it is gone. But he said he was going to ask a friend of his who was a big Queen fan, but he didn't get to ask him, so he emailed Brian May instead, the guitarist out of Queen. Hasn't got back to him yet, so... I wait to hear what he says about that.
That would be the definitive answer, whether there are multiple versions of it, and that's just what we're saying.
Can I ask you as well?
Memory is a pretty frail thing. So.
Well, this is the thing. But if you type in, here's the interesting thing about the Mandela effect. If you type that into Wikipedia, and don't get me wrong, I don't trust Wikipedia because anyone can edit it. But if you do type that into Wikipedia, it brings you to a page about a mental condition called confabulation, which the explanation for it is people who have memories of a past that is not actually real. They've misremembered the past and stuff like that.
Right.
And that's where it brings you to.
Well, there's a lot of work about that, about fabricating memories, and lawyers are very good at doing that and confusing witnesses and things like that. So it's a real effect. I mean, we are only human. Do
you think Sando has the ability to affect reality at a quantum level? I mean, what is CERN actually doing? They're pumping billions upon billions into that Large Hadron Collider. What's the end result? What's humanity going to benefit from that?
Well, I think we've benefited quite a bit in a better understanding that the standard model of physics that we have, which is really the basic tentpole of understanding our reality. I mean,
the reason I asked you the question, Richard, is, when you look around the world, I look around Ireland and stuff like that. Ireland has been crippled with austerity over the last 10 years. You look around the world at, what's going on in Syria, what went on in Iraq, and, the misery that goes on. And if you ask any person that's caught up in all of this, do you care what CERN are doing looking for the answers to the universe and stuff like that? They wouldn't care.
Well, that's true, but... You have to take this on one level or the other. It is, the technology that we have today was fostered in laboratories, 10, 20, 30 years ago even. And it's the laboratories that we're doing now, and it's the basic understanding of the physics that we're gaining now, which will give us products, medicines, understanding that we will be using in the future.
Right. So that's what it's really all about, trying to discover the pure nature of reality.
It's an investment for the future. I mean, we all want the same thing, and it is a better understanding of our world so that we can make it a better place.
It's just when you see so much. Poverty in the world and stuff like that. I always ask the question, why can't they just sort out humanity's problems, and then once that's done, let's go and explore the universe? We seem to have all our priorities wrong,
Well, I think you need to do both. I think if you stop doing...
Oh, I don't have a problem doing both, don't get me wrong. But I think, as a species, we need to get our priorities right.
I agree with you 100%.
I'm not anti-science or anything like that. I love science. I think science is a wonderful thing, trying to figure out, the nature of reality in the universe and where we come from and all that. But, I'm also a proponent of, fixing the world and, eradicating poverty and misery and whatnot,
Well, I think that you can better address eradicating poverty and misery through understanding science and technology. And I think we've seen that. And I think, if we do more of that, I think we can address more of that problem.
Well, look, here's to a wonderful future. Richard, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming on to the show. It's been a very, very interesting conversation.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much for coming on. Talk to you again soon.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Richard Terrile. You can check him out. He's on YouTube. Are we living in a simulated reality? Is this the Matrix? Who knows? I mean, maybe we are, maybe we're not. Will we ever know? I don't know. But like I said, the world is in a bit of a mad state. I've brought this issue up many times on the show. The amount of misery that exists in the world, the amount of poverty. I mean, look here, even in Dublin, taking over Apollo House just to make sure the homeless aren't freezing to death this year, and they slap an injunction on them. And it's stuff like that gets up my goat, and don't get me wrong, what Richard Terrile and other scientists like him are doing is wonderful, discovering the nature of reality and all that. It's brilliant. It progresses science, it progresses humanity. But at the same time, we need to sort all this other bullshit out first and then go and explore the universe, which I think is a fair enough cop. Anyway, an interesting subject to say the least. If you have any comments, you can text the studio. I should have given out the number earlier on. It's 087 062 7138. That's 087 062 7138. I've got a couple of minutes left, so I want to mention a couple of things that are going to be happening. We'll be back up in the studio during the week. I have to record next Monday's show before next Monday, and I hope to have Christina Delaney, who was briefly on with me there a couple of weeks ago, talking about All-Ireland medals, new All-Ireland medals. I will be getting her back on. I'm going to make contact with her in the next couple of days, go up and record that show, and that's going to be for next Monday's show. As I said, I won't be in the studio. One or two things I want to mention as well. Now, coming up after Christmas, something I've mentioned on the show before is the Open Minds Conference in Dooley's Hotel down in Waterford on the 25th and 26th of February. I'll be attending myself, and there's going to be some great speakers at that. You'll have Ben Gilroy, you'll have Mark Devlin, Ian O'Crine, Judith Very Baker, Mark Boyerski. Some fabulous speakers are going to be at that, and that's been organised by the Awake and Aware in South East Ireland Facebook page. Trevor Ivers, Danny Jacobs, Lolly, Laura Crane, a lot of people all involved in that, doing wonderful work, getting some wonderful speakers over here to Ireland to basically enlighten you over the course of the day, and it's going to be fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to it. That's the Awake and Aware conference, the Open Minds conference organised by Awake and Aware in South East Ireland, and that's going to be taking place at Dooley's Hotel. Tickets are available. You can go to Eventbrite for tickets for that, but if you go on to Facebook, you can check One to the World You Don't Know. There's loads of links on there. The World You Don't Know page. Go on to Awake and Aware in South East Ireland's page. You can go on to Open Mind Ireland page as well, and you'll find links to Eventbrite to get tickets. Now, tickets are going cheap. There's early bird tickets that you can get up until the end of this month. I'm not sure the exact price, but it's a lot less than buying two separate tickets for both days. You get the whole weekend ticket and you get a good price, and you will also get a good price in Dooley's Hotel as well. If you go online and book, just go online and book Dooley's Hotel, but there's plenty of other hotels down there anyway. You can get good cheap accommodation for less than €50 for a night, and you'll get your breakfast the following day, so it's not a bad thing at all. That's organised, as I said, by Trevor Ivers and all his friends, his crew down there in the southeast, and that's an event I'm really looking forward to. Now, as I said, Judith Very Baker is going to be appearing at that. I'm hoping to get her on after Christmas, sometime in the new year, before February for definite, and maybe one or two other speakers. Hilary Connor is going to be there as well. She was a guest a couple of weeks ago on the show. Great guest. Now, unfortunately, the audio wasn't great for the Hilary Connor show, so I will be getting her back on, because it was a fascinating subject, talking about spiritualism and stuff like that. And that all sort of ties in with what I was talking about tonight. Hacking into the Matrix, mediums, all that sort of stuff. If we are indeed a simulation, every part of that simulation can communicate with each other. All we have to do, folks, is figure out how to hack the system, and we'll be all away in a hack, as it were. Anyway, this has been The World You Don't Know, folks. I want to wish you all a very, 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 very happy Christmas. Hope you have a wonderful Christmas and an absolutely amazing 2017. Everybody listening, really, I really do. So, until I see you all in a couple of weeks' time. Next week's show there's no point in texting in or anything like that. No one's going to hear you. I won't be here. So, and I'll be back up then the following week, just after the New Year. So until then, folks, remember, the world is full of wonderful people. If you can't find one, be one. Until next time, talk to you all very soon.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, the secret oath, and the secret proceedings.
Waking humanity, one soul at a time. This is the World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.